Back again. This will be a quicker video, I think. I've got two games that I wanted to showcase. One of them is against with this exact version of the deck. The other one is with a version that did not run accumulated knowledge. But the results of that game was my opponent running AKs, and that reminded me of how insane that card really is. So I immediately put it back into my deck. I played accumulated knowledge a very long time ago. I played it back when it was, well, when it was first released and you could run 4 factor fictions and 4 accumulated knowledge, and it was delicious. We're talking about 2000, I think it was either 2001 or 2003, like somewhere around there, but very early in the Magic's history. But I haven't played it much since. However, it is a phenomenal card, and it seems to be working really well in here. So I had to take out a few things. I homogenized the early game for this deck a little bit better, you know, with the AKs, searches, counterspells, blessings, Sylvan. So other than blessings, which are not as bad with AK as you might think. In fact, it's quite good. If you have the perfect pile, which is 4 accumulated knowledges and a blessing in your graveyard, and you draw a blessing, you just target blessing, AK, AK, and you just keep looping that over and over, it's totally insane, right? So if you do hit use search and you flip a blessing, you don't have to put the blessing in your graveyard. You can just put it directly in your hand and not reveal it. So it's not like it's the worst thing ever. But a flipped search for Escanta will dig for accumulated knowledges very quickly, and you can just spin through your deck so fast, it's just not beatable. Without maybe, like, I don't know, something extremely unusual, or maybe some kind of Cavern of Souls setup. But, you know, basically, in reality, it's just not beatable. So fantastic. It's a fantastic fit, but, you know, time will tell if it turns out to be too slow and I should just be running like impulses and stuff to go get humility, or put the Sterling Groves back in for the silver bullets. But I think maybe not. With a lot of removal and a lot of, like, I can afford to go 1-for-1 games, and I can even force a will a little bit easier when I've got accumulated knowledges to do it with. So we'll see. At any rate, let's take a look at a couple of these games and we'll see how they played out. I will say this, I might like a little bit more blue cards in here. Like, you really want as many blue cards as you can with 4 forces and a misdirection. Misdirection, incidentally, being one of the few answers for Abrupt Decay, but also an absolute backbreaker if they try to him you. But at any rate, let's just take a look and see how the game's played out. So this first one, I will mention briefly, though, this is an 0-2 result because I had, at the end of the game, I had, you know, back to the deck, I had Kaya, Jace, Moat. Oh, yeah. Kaya, Jace, Moat. Daretti, Dak Faden, Dovin, Sylvan, flipped Azcanta, regular Azcanta, Crucible, all in play, 7 cards in hand, and my opponent had 0 cards in hand. They wouldn't concede, though, and so I was just dutifully plussing Jace, plus, not paying attention whatsoever to the fact that my Sylvan was on Always Yield and Always Yes. And with 2 cards in my library, I Sylvan myself to death, felt really stupid about it, and I just conceded. I had already used a ton of time. The game was insane, and you'll see as much as I can show you. I think this game bugs because it was so long, and there was only one of them, and we looped through our libraries. Each of us, when you combine the amount of times that we reshuffled our libraries together, it exceeded, it was between 6 and 12, like half dozen to a dozen times. Total madness. But I'll show you what I can and describe what I can. First, I'm going to start with this match against Aratori here. And we'll just take a look at how this one ran out. Because also in the previous match, the one I was describing with the deck looping, my build was a little bit different. I wasn't running AKs. That was actually, my opponent was, and that was the thing that reminded me of why I wanted to play it. And then immediately I had this game here. So very cool stuff, as you'll see in a moment. Now, can I get the game log up? No. How do I bring that up? All right, so the first couple turns are doing nothing. I wasn't sure if my opponent was on Delver or a combo, but Third mana source in those colors, no plays. I'm pretty sure this is combo. It could be control, but highly unlikely, right? Who plays control in Legacy? Who's foolish enough to do that, right? Opponent runs out Limdol's Vault, and that pretty much shields it for me. It's a combo deck. So, okay. Fair enough. Combo deck against me. I'm not the deck that the combo deck wants to face. We'll put it mildly. Anyway, so I make no play here, thinking whatever they tutored for, they're going to go for it. They don't go for it. So I'm going to AK again. My hand's just getting better and better, right? So go ahead and get that Sylvan down and sit pretty on... How many counter spells is that? It's going to be real hard for him to combo off. We'll put it that way. Opponent does nothing, so fair enough. I'll just leave my fetch there for the Sylvan. And try to disrupt them. I'm not going to play Dovin just yet because I have lots of blue cards that I want in my hand for those forces. Opponent does nothing, so I'll go ahead and Sylvan. And this time I am going to pay life so I can hit my land drop and pick up another blue card to force with, which allows me to play Dovin. Obviously, assuming that, like I said, they're on combos, so I'm prepping for a big turn with Flusterstorms and whatnot. Opponent goes for a Thoughtseize. I figured this was the big turn, but the Conjurer's Bauble throws me, so okay. Find myself an Ancestral Recall, so I'll go ahead and pay 4 life with Sylvan. I've gained 2 life off of Dovin, so really I've only played 3 and 3. And I'm going to run out of Jace here. So I'm running out of Jace here because I knew there was a blue card on top to replace it. And if my opponent makes no play, which is what I was hoping, I get to Ancestral Recall at the end of their turn and have a Jam-Day Tome in play. So we'll definitely be doing that. All right, so I'm going to hit my land drop, and now I'm going to play a Disrupting Scepter and a second Jam-Day Tome effect. Use my Jace, activate Dovin and swing in so it'll grab some counters. And then I'm going to shuffle my library with Tithe, getting a card I don't want to draw because I had Guy's Blessings on the top, and I can just pitch Plains Plow here. Opponent goes for a he's going for the big turn. So Leto's Petal, Dark Ritual. I'm going to counter that. I'm going to force the Ritual. I don't want to try to deal with a Stormed effect, so I want to stop their mana. I force with Teferi here because I don't need yet another. Okay, I'm going to pause. Oop. I force with Teferi there because I've got tons of card drawing. I don't need more card drawing. I just want to retain as many counters in my hand, so I don't force with force. My opponent says, that's pretty lucky. I said, I'm not sure, as I have Ancestral Recall multiple times in effect, which is 100% true. I've drawn an insane number. Well, 29 cards to 40, right? So I'm up 11 cards, right? Opponent says, you're playing plenty of non-blue. It's pretty lucky that you had all 5 of those cards at the same time. I said, I see, yeah, only 24 blue cards in this, so, you know. He says, so it was extremely lucky. I'm not sure that the math quite works out to describe extremely lucky here, but if you figure I've got 24 blue cards in the deck, and then we subtract 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cards that are not blue. So out of the remaining 50, roughly 50 cards, 51 cards, and we can take out these two, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, or that's not how that works. Sorry, 51, 50, 49, 48, 47, 46, 45. So out of the 45 cards that are not blue, that we don't know about, basically, 20 plus are blue. So, I mean, yeah, I just decide I'm not even going to try to bust out a calculator. I'm just going to say agree. So I say, yeah, see, yeah, only 24 blue cards. He's so extremely lucky. And I said, yeah, I'll buy that. I mean, I don't know. I can't do paper napkin math when it's that complicated in the middle of a game. It's not going to happen. And he says that's pretty lucky. But from my perspective of playing Control for 25 years, roughly, when you Ancestral Recall, Jam-Day Tome, Ancestral Recall, basically, I've drawn 2 extras off Sylvan, plus seen, you know, pretty deep into my library. 2 extras off Kaya, twice off Jace. So that's 6 extra cards, plus an Ancestral, plus the AK for 2. You win those games. So, yeah. Anyway, back to Ancestral Recalling. So I go ahead and attack my opponent's mana base here, plus Dovin, so that I can ultimate next turn, smash my opponent's land again with Vindicate, and we wrap up the game. My opponent scoops, got 3 cards in hand, and I don't know, it's very slow control deck, so I don't... I mean, he gave me all the time in the world to set up the perfect hand, but, you know, it is what it is. So opponent wasn't too happy with that, and I get it. It's frustrating. So we start again, and then my opponent asked me about why Vindicate, and I said it gives me outs against a lot of things that matter in the control games. He says, why not Anguished? I said because of flipped Ascanta was all I said, implying that's the reason, which is actually one of the main reasons. So the other is, of course, this is a mana attacking deck, and I need a way to kill basic lands. All right, so opponent duresses right off the bat, or Thoughtseizes right off the bat, and then vaults. I have no counters. I have almost no defenses here. This is the turn my opponent needs to win. My opponent does not win. So I draw an extra card, thin my deck a little bit more, and find a counterspell. Lovely. And an AK. Oh my gosh, I'm loving AK in this deck. All right, so opponent brainstorms. Fair enough. Fetches and has no play? No, goes for Lion's Eye Diamond. Lion's Eye Diamond. Lotus Petal and the big payout. Experimental Frenzy. I will counter. Opponent is not happy. And this starts a conversation, I believe. Anyway, on this turn, I'm going to go and kill their mana and attack the mana. And opponent says, so this is so interesting to me. My opponent says, so you're playing 4 counter spells or you just lucked it out again. So what they recognize is that either I am not playing 4 counters and I got super lucky and drew, like, say I'm only playing 2, or I am playing 4 counters and, well, that was a good draw. It's not like super lucky. Let's take a look. My opponent drew 2 Lion's Eye Diamonds. I happen to draw 2 counter spells. Drawing 2 of the same card is not super lucky. Now, having it be counterspell is lucky, but 2 of a kind, not really. Anyway, so my opponent frames it, though, that either it's lucky or I drew, or I'm playing 4. So I explained to them that after sideboarding, all right, so I'm going to keep going after my opponent's mana. Of course, I'm going to plus up, and I guess the comment didn't come through here, but I explained to them that I'm actually playing 14 counterspells after sideboarding. Anyway, yeah, 13. I took out Misdirection, as a matter of fact. So opponent goes for Duress here, counterspell number 3. Opponent says that's questionable sideboarding against Storm with 24 discard spells, and I respond with Leyline of Sanctity, which means that you now have 24 discard spells that can't target me. Opponent says, I just give him my link, and I said, if you're interested, controls all I play, and I offered him my channel. Says, I think you have a high opinion of yourself, and that's not making me want to go to your channel. And I said, that's totally fine. He says, you are a strange one. I said, we're all strange to someone. He says, well, luck wins this one. Sometimes that's what magic is. And you are right, my friend. Sometimes that's what it is. But sometimes it's also not what it is. And if you chalk up all of your losses to luck, I think you're making a mistake. I was lucky this game, there's no question. But it's a tiny little bit ridiculous, obviously. So I don't know if you use this tech, for those of you that are watching, but Leyline's been used for a very long time. Originally, it wasn't Leyline, though. If I remember correctly, it was 2 white and 2 colorless. You had to hardcast it, and it didn't give you hexproof. It gave you Shroud, all of which meant you had to be a little bit more creative about it. This card's just a vast improvement. The other card that I'm thinking of, I forgot what it's called. Excuse me. But it, too, was in the original Gaia's Blessings decks. I don't have mine in the main. I could, but I do have it in the sideboard for precisely 2 decks. One is everything running a million Duresses, and the other one is all the decks with Burn. I also am not sure, but if opponent has, there are a couple of other cards that it can impact, but I don't see anyone playing them. For example, Tithe actually says target opponent has more lands than you, so you can't play a Tithe if there's a Leyline out, a Leyline of Sanctity. And there's a few other cards that are really odd, but happen to say target opponent and are hurt by discard, blocked by discard. Meanwhile, because I have Hexproof and not Shroud, I can target myself if I need to, although aka Factor Fiction, Blessings, none of those actually target me, so not that big of a deal. Now, of course, after sideboarding in the Hydroblasts, if the game goes long enough and I ultimate Dak, I can start Hydroblasting lands if I so chose and gaining control of them one after the other, which is why it is Hydroblast and not Blue Elemental Blast, in case you were wondering. So now I'm going to run through the second match, which was actually the first match, which is the one that I actually won, even though it says I lost. And it's going to bug out. There is no Game 2, as you can see. Game 2 doesn't exist because I gave up. Although, I guess that's what my hand was. The first game was just so frustrating. Killing myself with my own Sylvan. Like, I deserved to lose, but I kind of was a little bit tilted also that my opponent hadn't given up. And I asked him, why didn't you give up so we could play Game 2? And he's like, oh, well, I wanted to time you out. And I was like, okay. That's fine. In my head, I'm thinking like, yeah, sure, but you know, it's a practice room. I mean, I guess it helps me practice, but it doesn't really help you practice, you know. So whatever. I just let it go. All right. The cool thing though is my opponent recognized where some of the tech in this deck originated, at least in a high-profile event. Now I don't remember, but I think that may have been the first time I saw it. And I'll show you when he says it. But we've got to run through the games first. So, all right, my hand's a little sketchy, but I can dig for mana here and disrupt slightly. So we'll go ahead and do that. Runs a Terramander out. All right, I need to brainstorm here. And they've got an Elixir of Immortality, and I'm thinking, like, what is this? This is the tournament practice room. Is this noob? What does this indicate? I don't know. I don't know yet. So opponent Force the Will's a search, and I think, okay, well, with a Future Sight, and I'm like, okay, not a noob, just some personal, like, tech, and I guess with Future Sight, Elixir's not really a big deal. All right, so I hit Blessing off Search, which is going to shuffle Brainstorm. Actually, that's an amazing graveyard to reshuffle, right? Because I'd love to flip Search, but getting Force, Brainstorm, Fire Ice, and a Flooded Strand back into my deck is very nice. And my opponent says, Walamies. And if you don't know why he said that, I recommend that you Google Walamies Gaia's Blessing. And I make a huge mistake here, and I say about Terramander, and you'll see what happens. And I mention how my mistake is related to misunderstanding how this card works. So I didn't realize this thing becomes a freaking 5/5. I thought it became a 4/4. Yuck. And so, okay, so my opponent draws the first card off of Accumulated Knowledge. Hits me for a point of damage. The Terramander here is a gross, ridiculous card, but which I'm not. I don't really like the aggro cards, but I can totally understand why it's in his deck. I mean, it's a 1-mana 5/5. Eventually. So I play a land here, and I want to get Jace down to bounce the Terramander. My opponent's low on cards, 4 cards in hand. I'm going to go ahead and close the Exile Zone. I don't want him casting a second AK here, so I'm just going to push Ghost Kai out. And if it gets countered, that's one less counter that could potentially pave the way for Jace. Meanwhile, they weren't able to spend their mana to play an AK. Instead, they play a Disc, which is really interesting. So I'm going to actually... I find a Misdirection, so I'm going to actually put the Misdirection in my hand. Opponent's tapped out with only 2 cards left, and that is a perfect opportunity for me to run out Jace the Mind Sculptor. So I'm going to do that with behind the protection of a Misdirect. So I play Jace, and if you're not sure how this works, this is the time to find out. Most of the people watching the channel probably already know how this works, but what I just did right there was I misdirected their Force of Will to target the Misdirection. After Misdirection resolves, Force of Will is targeting a card that's not on the stack, and so it's countered by game mechanics. And then I screwed up royally because I thought this Pteramander was going to become a 4/4. So I don't bounce it. And because I don't bounce it, I get to plus Jace once and never get to draw cards off it, which is extraordinarily bad. My opponent then plays another accumulated knowledge and is now up to 2 cards in hand and beating me with a 5/5. So this looks pretty bad for me. All right, I don't want Tithe. I do want to flip this Kanta. All right, so there's a Plow. When it goes for a Brainstorm, I'm going to Plow in response and nailed it. They only have 1 card, so they can't force it. Had to be counter. Instead, they find Ancestral Recall. Oh my gosh. So at this time, I was playing with Daze in the deck. So I respond with activating Escanta, like desperately hoping to Daze. I don't find it, so I just take a Vindicate. But although my opponent has 4 cards in hand, I've got an active Jamday Tome on the board in the Escanta. In fact, it's a much more powerful Jamday Tome, but my opponent's running Factor Fiction too, so like, yuck. I respond to the Factor Fiction by getting a counterspell, but I don't have a second blue. I can't play it. So I split my opponent AK or 4 other cards because that accumulated knowledge draws 4. They take the 4 other cards and then shuffle their graveyard back in. So now they have all 4 AKs back in the deck. One of the 4 cards they took was Future Sight, but I did the split that way since I just found a Vindicate. Opponent plays a land prior to Future Sight, so they miss a land drop, so they were trying to protect it with counter, I think, but I guess not. So I Vindicate it, no fight. Awesome. I'm just going to sit on this counter spell, and I now have a Search which I can force with, which is excellent for me as well. The opponent's got 6 cards in hand to my 4, and they've got more mana, and a disc which might as well be a blank against me for most of this game. But I'm actually doing pretty well. I just need 1 more blue so that I can dig with this Kanta and counter on the same turn. So, like, just love to hit a land here, but I hit a counter. I'm never going to complain again about that, but it isn't. And my opponent is restarting their accumulated knowledge engine and Factor Fiction. I let them have it. I say AK, or do you want 4 lands and a disc? And they take AK because at this point, 4 lands and a disc, they would put into their hand and then they would immediately discard like 3 cards to an overfull hand. So I actually dig and find Teferi. I chose Teferi over Counterspell because at this point, I want something that I can pressure with, and I finally play as Kanta because I also drew the Fire Ice to force a will with, and I want to be able to. I play as Kanta because I can use the flipped as Kanta right here, but this will also, the search will actually let me search for land because flipped as Kanta doesn't dig up land, right? And we're actually even on cards in hand now. My opponent's got, and I pick up a second Force of Will, which is phenomenal. So now I'm starting to look for land. I hit Blessing, so that's kind of cool. I'm not going to flip his Kanta anyway. The other one's already flipped, so we're not going to play that game. So I get a land drop because of it, and decide I'm going to go for a Teferi. Opponent has a counter. I'm going to counter back, and I decide that I'm actually going to fight for board presence here, even though it puts me at risk against whatever they can do on their turn, the playback. And I push, and it sticks. Now, I hate forcing with a counterspell, but I felt like it was worth it here because the combination of Teferi and Search means I can actually draw a Search for his Kanta, draw a Teferi, untap my Search, and draw again. So my opponent plays an Aetherling, which I have to read it carefully. It does not get flying. It can be unblockable, but not flying, which is really important because, you know, my deck has Moat in it. All right, so Search here. Hopefully, so far we haven't bugged out, but it's going to bug out at some point here. And unfortunately, this game was like amazing. My opponent's down to 2 cards in hand also. Now notice my opponent has disc. There's a really funny interaction here. If my opponent discs right now, they kill Search. It doesn't kill Planeswalkers. I don't want a Wasteland there. So I'm going to go ahead and tuck their disc and see if they'll do it. They don't. I think that was actually, in hindsight, an error. But it is the play I made. So they go for a Factor Fiction. Again, I respond this way, I decide I'm going to take a Moat in case his Humility doesn't land. So I give him Force of Will or a counter, disc, counter, card draw. So here's the funny thing. I'm going to pause again. With Aetherling, because it doesn't fly, so anyway, it can flicker out and then come back. The problem is, so I gave my opponent a disc. I don't care, because if they blow the disc, Aetherling doesn't have any abilities, so they are going to kill Humility and Search, and Aetherling and Disc, and of course the Elixir they'll use it prior to, but that's effectively a dead draw anyway. So they're going to go down 3 cards, and I'm going to go down 2. I'm actually up. Meanwhile, Aetherling can just keep hitting Teferi for 1, and I can just keep plussing Teferi. I don't care about that. So there's no way that the Disc actually gets him out of the problem of keeping a threat, which their intent obviously is to exile Aetherling and then blow the Disc. But it just doesn't work against Humility. And then funny enough, if they do manage to address that, and they get another Aetherling, well, this thing doesn't get flying either. So Moat will actually give them the same problem. They can kind of. It'll keep Aetherling from hitting me. Now, if they got a second Disc out, then they could flicker it out with a Moat in play and then blow the Disc. But it's going to be a lot of work, basically, is what I'm getting at. For them to do anything about my Planeswalkers. Opponent has a Jace there. I give them Ponder or 2 lands. They take Ponder. Of course, attacking Teferi here. I am at 6, so there could be... Maybe they could have gone face. But I think attacking Teferi is right. Because very quickly Teferi will just tuck that creature. Alright, so I find a Kaya. Again, second Kaya for the match. Draw a card. Ooh, with Counterspell, I'm definitely going to try to run that Kaya out there. Opponent has a counter. I'm going to push. Too good not to. Opponent has Force of Will, so now they've actually gone down in cards from where they were. And because of I get to untap 2 lands, I'm still going to be able to activate Escanta here. So opponent, again, attacks Teferi, sacks their thing. There are 3 cards in hand, and I'm at 2 cards in hand in just a moment. They activate Jace, and I dig up a Swords to Plowshares. And I take Swords to Plowshares because if my opponent tries to disc, I'm actually going to plow that Morphling because they have recursion, and I want to. As you can see, I had some other cards in here that were not accumulated knowledge. Nice Whisper, good card, but AK much better. Anyway. I want to remove that Morphling thing from the game while I can. Otherwise, Plow will be totally worthless. But because I'm hoping they don't disc just yet, I actually am hoping that I get to untap these lands before they blow the disc, and I do. I now have double Plow up. So things are looking pretty good for me. Opponent is digging. They want to fight, but they're losing the war. I'm going to go ahead and try to plow this thing now to try to force the disc. They brainstorm in response. Then they activate their Elixir yet again, having mulligan themselves another time. They brainstorm again, blow the disc, and in response to that, I'm going to throw another plow out, which gets that thing out of the game. So no way that they can recur it, which is obviously extremely good for me. So now I'm going to Teferi. And this is where it starts to get a little bit crazy. We're both at 3 cards in hand. My opponent's ahead on mana, but I'm really, truly the one winning this game at the moment. So I'm going to draw a card here, and then I'm going to Escanta a card into my hand. Yeah, again, I had the Sterling Groves instead of AKs. Like, what a ridiculous thing. I get to Vindicate their Planeswalker finally, and I'm not even risking being unable to cast Force of Will, provided they don't do an end step play. Because I'm about to untap 2 lands, one of which is Escanta. So I don't play Crucible here because obviously I'd like to activate Search for Escanta the Sunken Ruins yet again. This is actually farther than I got in the replay, so I'm hoping that means that whatever was causing the bug is cleared up. I don't even know how that works, but it's amazing if that's the case. Opponent plays Disc, and I don't care. It doesn't kill Escanta, it doesn't kill Teferi. In fact, it doesn't do anything against me whatsoever. This deck is Disc immune for the most part. I've actually considered running Disc in here on a loop for this exact reason, because you just don't care, and it's a cure-all. It may be a very good answer for a deck like Enchantress, for example. Clearing all their enchantments and all their Enchantresses out in a single shot would be pretty amazing. So it might be worth a consider. Anyway, I'm double Escanting. I had Days in here too. Yeah, I had a bunch of just chaff that's gone. At least it seems like chaff to me. All right, so again, untapping Escanta. just totally amazing. Right. I mean, I can't imagine playing mono blue without 4 Wastelands. It just seems awful. And I don't understand playing Disc without Mishra's Factories either. But my opponent has neither, and they're not pressuring me at all. So I'm holding on to Moat and Plow in case they do have Factories. But yeah, your Painful Truths, again, better card drawing is what we've got now. So anyway, I'm going to just keep on. So I'm going for a DAC here just because it'll hit their Disc. Opponent has 1 card in hand, so I decide, you know what, I kind of want the DAC Faden. So I'm going to go ahead and force a will here. I won't force a second time if they've got a counter, but I decided to actually plus up and run out Jace against what I perceive to be a safe board state. And my opponent surprises me with the counterspell, so I just let it ride. This is probably, that turn was, in my opinion, in hindsight, that was a misplay. There was no reason to do what I did. It was very risky for me to do it, but I think also I was looking at the clock and a little bit paying attention to my time and trying to kind of spin through. So as you can see, though, at this point, we've got to where I attempt to take their Disc, and they just let me have it because it's useless. They could have popped it in response, and it would have killed itself and nothing else. Speaking of useless, it looks like we're going to bug out, by the way, but I dig here. So what's going to happen is I start looping. I grab a Gaia's Blessing, and then I Blessing in counters, and I think Kaya. And pretty soon I'm looping my library with, I've got massive counter spells. I've got a tremendous, I could get the rest of my Planeswalkers out, but I play the Sylvan. And like I was saying earlier, I get down to 2 cards and I kill myself. I'm also not playing too aggressively here when I should be, given that I've used tons and tons and tons of time on my clock. I could have just gone and got the Jace and then just chased my opponent out and won that way. A lot of different things I could have done, but ultimately I lose. But I thought if you enjoy control battles, that even though the game bugs out here, that you would enjoy watching this. And as it turns out, I actually expected it to bug out earlier, so this was actually more satisfying. But as you can pretty clearly see, got control of this game, and it's not going to ever, my opponent's never going to get back in the game. At this point, I can DAC myself, spinning through tons of cards, like between DAC, Teferi, and Iskanta. I just was a little bit excited about how many cards I could spin through, so that was the problem. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. That is where the deck is at, and as you can see, it certainly would have been a lot better in that game there had I had the accumulated knowledges. It does make for a trickier game against opponents because their knowledges will trigger mine and mine will trigger theirs. So it's a cat and mouse game where you actually got to time things correctly. So, you know, like they AK for 1, they AK for 2, you draw 3, and then immediately like draw 4 and then just lock them out of the game. Something along those lines. But, and of course, after sideboarding, I'm not sure what they bring in. I'm not sure what the opponent brings in there. But, I mean, after sideboarding, I bring in this, which is just awful for them, and cut something that looks probably like that. I'll keep the humility in just because Terramancer and whatnot, which I can also Pyroblast out of the sky, so not that big of a deal. But I'd do something along those lines, and I think probably be just fine. I think it'd be very, very hard for my opponent to beat a deck that looks like this, right? So anyway, it is a matter of the clock, though. Hopefully you enjoyed watching those games. That's all I've got for now. Deck is a super blast to play, and strangely enough, has a very high win rate. I remember when I was struggling to play Control and Legacy. Lately, it hasn't been a big struggle, as you could see. So I'm not sure what changed. It might just be the luck of who I'm matched up against, and this deck could be terrible for all I know. But so far, it feels really good to play, and I think that you'll enjoy playing it as well. I will say this card maybe does need to be cut. One card that it could be that'll get me a similar function but is actually a little easier to play is this one. And now that I think about it, I think I will actually make that change. So that'll be one change that I make right there to get a similar effect on an instant that I can force a will with. Yeah, I think that's a little bit better. All right. That's it. That's all I've got this time. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.